Welcome to Artist Fit podcast for the day. We are grateful that we have another opportunity to have this conversation, and our today's conversation is actually on the existence of God. We both have a burden to explain how reality is shaped. This we will do today by looking at the both sides, both the theism and atheism. If we must do that, we must do it with respect to each other and only allow facts to be the judgment standard, not the tone, the sound, and or aggression. The reason we are here is to have a sober discussion on God's existence with an aim to help our viewers to appreciate the biblical position that God exists outside of space, time, and matter in relation to the alternative reasoning against the same. And to help us have this discussion today, we have an amazing panel of three brothers and one sister. And so I want to give them an opportunity to introduce themselves and give us their general overview of the topic, the existence of God. We start with the man on the far left.
Thank you, Daktari. I'm very excited to be here. My name is Mark Chege, and I'm a Christian. I work with a ministry called Apologetics Kenya, and we are interested in the confluence between faith and science and reason and all these issues. And I think on this question of God, it becomes very pertinent because it's a question that hinges on reality, because God as a being either exists or does not exist. You cannot have an in-between about him. And so it is very important that one picks a position based on understanding, because these are also questions that have eternal consequences. So I'm very excited to be here and looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
So my name is Linza Elimo. And based on this conversation, actually this is the most crucial conversations that many people get involved in. And what's so much fantastic about this kind of discussions, they open our minds and see, and we also learn to appreciate the supernatural way of life and things that happen. So I'm excited to be here for this discussion.
Thank you so much, Linza.
Yeah, my name is Jared Oginga. I'm a Christian and also a theologian. And for the topic of the day, to me, if I were to frame the topic, it would have been something like, what if God did not exist? Because as a Christian, the default setting is that God exists. And actually, to say that God does not exist, in fact, the topic itself assumes that God exists, because we even have a name for him, God. I mean, how did we come up with it? If that concept or that person does not exist at all. So maybe the next time we have such a similar discussion, the topic should be, what if God did not exist?
Wow.
But even talking about God, we are assuming here that the God we supposedly are trying to see whether they exist or not is the biblical God. Because there are several gods. Are we saying they are saying all the gods don't exist, or only one God does not exist?
Thank you so much, Jared. All right.
Thank you very much. My name is Morris Wanjohi, also known as Secular Kenyan. I'm the one on the, is it called what? The opponent.
Yes.
On the receiving end. All bets are against me. I'm playing away. And I'm a minority, but what matters, I think, facts doesn't worry about whether you're minority or majority. So I look forward to the discussion. I just want to correct that the default setting is not that God exists. The default setting is also not that God does not exist. The default setting is we don't know. Then we can make an argument from there. But that's it for me. I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you so much, Maurice, and welcome.
Thank you.
Indeed, it looks like every other person here is home ground. So you are from the away. But sometimes teams go to these away matches, and they surprisingly
Do better.
do better. So,
Saying
Yeah.
if I do better, it will be a surprise.
no, Jared, you've just mentioned something very interesting that you wish that the topic could be changed. When I was just thinking about this topic, someone challenged me that actually that the topic needs to change.
Oh.
And yeah, the perception here was from the dictionaries, they define exist as come into being. So according to the person, because he was a Christian talking to me, come into being. So he was saying, if we come to have this discussion on an already settled mind, that we are talking about God coming to being,
That would be
is that we as Christians have lost the discussion. Because is it a theological error then that theology discusses existence of God? Why are we discussing the existence of God? And yet we know that He is there.
Yeah, I think maybe, words have two meanings. Words have a popular meaning and also have their technical meaning. So the definition I've just given is the technical meaning. But the popular meaning exists when we say, does God exist? We do not at any time think that did God, or was there a time when God was not available? God has always existed outside of time. So, but in a popular usage, that's why the dictionary meaning that we have gotten from that definition. But when, especially speaking as a Christian, we know when we ask even the question, does God exist? We already, our default setting is God has always existed, even before we knew of the concept of God.
What do you think?
Yeah, and maybe here, just to answer the question on the meaning of existence, maybe as Jared would say, usually in discussions, there's what you have as dictionary definitions, then there's what is the philosophical definition. So that the idea of existence understood philosophically would more lean towards being. So whether God is, it's not so much of whether he came to being, because if we are talking about gods that have come to being, then we are not discussing the God of the Bible. Because the God of the Bible does not come to being. He's not created. He has always existed. And as he noted, the default position for the Christian is that God exists. Of course, we want to be kind to differing views, that there are people whose default position is not that God exists. And so perhaps just to lean towards what Morris has said, agnosticism in a philosophical discussion would be the default position, agnosticism. But then again, that is assuming that we are not Christians. But because we are Christians already, we know. And therefore, that's why for us, God exists. That's how I would define it.
Maybe before I bring Linsa to also weigh in, maybe she will bring a gender-packed conversation on the two perspectives. Now, again, Maurice, it's the same question. Why are you interested as an atheist, why are you interested in the topic existence of God? Yet, in your mind, it doesn't exist.
Does not exist.
Does it matter?
It does a lot, especially in Kenya.
Okay.
So for him, he's saying the default position is for a Christian would be God exists. Two things we need to define there, as you've tried to do. Define existence. He's during his introduction, he said God exists outside of time and space. That's a contradiction, because the very definition of existence is something that occupies space at a particular time. But that's splitting hairs. The other thing, the most important thing we need to define is how do you know, the process of knowing, to differentiate between belief and knowing. So how do you know? How do you arrive at the process of knowing? So that you say, I know you exist, I know this thing does not exist. Once you define that, then now you can make the argument whether God actually, exists, or you believe exists, or you think it does not exist.
No.
But now, to answer your question, Why does this question matter? From where I sit, the argument that God exists is a false claim, but it's not the only false thing that people believe. There are many things that people believe that are not true. Like there are people who believe the earth is flat. Why is there no atheism for flat others? Why is it not bothering anybody? But the argument of religion is bothering somebody, and that's why we have atheist and secular association. Because number one is the issue of public policy. We don't have flat earth believers saying we should legislate or guide communities based on their belief that the earth is flat. But that is not the case with the religious community, whether they are Christian, whether they are Muslims. What we have seen, especially in this country, in this continent, and everywhere, is that religion has tried to reach out to influence not just life of its members, but people who are outside. And this is historical. This is not a recent phenomenon. It's been there over the years. It was a criminal. It was punishable by death to be an atheist. I think about 400 years ago. People like Darwin could not even write their book because they feared what would happen. So, and in the contemporary sense, we see religion in every sphere of life, especially in our legislations. If you look at, and what we want is, to summarize, number one is to argue whether the God exists or not. Number two, even if giving a benefit of doubt, you guys were to make a convincing argument that God exists, how should that claim affect people who have not got into the idea? People who are not Christian, because we have a society that we have to exist with divergent ideas. So that is why the question matters, because it affects the public sphere of everybody, whether they are Christians, whether they are Muslim, or whether they are out. You can see it even in our constitution, in our national anthem, in our schools, in everywhere.
Oh, so you are in the space because you feel like Christians are reaching out or influencing so much or something?
No, I don't mind Christian reaching out. I don't mind Muslim reaching out. What I want is, when it comes to public matters, I'm into public policy. I want any public legislation, any public discourse to be based on data and facts.
Okay.
I care about what is true. So I don't want someone like let's say like the argument that is there about sex education in schools. I don't want it to be based because Christians, they have their argument against why sex before marriage, contraception. Muslims have their argument. I want it to be based on what the doctors and the scientific communities are saying about sex education and contraceptive, not what the morality of the Bible, Christian or Muslim says. That's
why should we take the science?
Because if we care about the truth, that is science is the only reliable way that we have so far.
That's not true.
It's okay. We will come back to that. That's a very interesting perspective. Let me bring in the only lady on the bench.
Yeah. So first of all, if we are to talk about someone superior or something superior that never existed, but right now, you can't talk about someone or something that hasn't been there before. So we can't talk about if we didn't have like the word God, so meaning that the word God is already there. That is why we are going to talk about him. So if he never existed, we could have never been here talking about God himself. So I feel that from the beginning, he's already been there. That is why we are here talking about him. Yes.
Okay. A very interesting, Mark, there's a very interesting perspective that Maurice has brought. The idea that he wants the popular policy, popular, public stuff to be on facts and science and not to be seen as if any religion is trying to impose their ideologies in public space.
Interestingly, I would agree with Maurice. But I would also say that atheism should also not impose itself on public policy, so that all religions, whether Christian, whether atheism, whether agnosticism, let us all come. Because I agree, if we are going to make discussions on public policy, we have got to begin somewhere, isn't it? Because it is suboptimal for me as a Christian, but because it is for the public consumption, let everyone bring whatever they have on the table. But you will realize that there's a lot of sleight of hand. Sleight of hand like in magic. So that the secularists will on one side say that let the religious guy not bring in their presuppositions. But then on the other hand, they want to bring in their secular presuppositions. So what we want is this, that let us agree that everyone is coming with presuppositions. As a Christian, I'm coming into this discussion as a Christian. As an atheist, you're coming into this discussion as an atheist, isn't it? Mm-hmm. And then ask the facts we have, for example, around us, where are they pointing us? And so that's why you find, for example, in discussions, say sex education and everything, the Christian is not just arguing that it is wrong because the Bible says so. He's also arguing that it is wrong for society. You get where we are going? So that the discussions are empirical in and of themselves without necessarily loading them with religious presuppositions. But I dare say that not even the atheists should be allowed to load their religious presuppositions, because they will quickly say ours is not a religion, but then it is based on presuppositions that they cannot prove. No. So if you're going to be an atheist and you want to say that atheism should guide public policy, first prove the atheism, which is something they have never done. They will quickly run, it is just a lack of belief. It is not what, but the truth is that's a psychological state of mind. It is not a position. So that's where I feel like public policy should go. Yeah, I don't know whether I can steal a minute here and comment about something he said about existence.
Please go ahead.
And I think it is also philosophically wrong, because philosophy does not consider material existence as the only kind of existence. So if you say that to say that God exists outside time is a logical fallacy, it does not in any way contradict any of the laws of logic. And so why should we assume that the material reality is all that there is? Now, that is an atheistic assumption, isn't it? So the atheists should tell us, why should we assume that only the material world exists? And I don't think they have any answer to that. So
maybe Morris has, so you will be surprised.
No, you see, and this is why I started with defining how we know things. I cannot make a claim that, I want to answer your last question.
Yes.
Whether materialism is all there is. As far as we can tell, materialism is all we can see. We are not saying
that.
Who is
us?
Human beings. We are not saying that there is no supernatural. But the question is, how do you know? Because the one who makes claim has to come with evidence. If I tell you, and let me go back to the default position. The default position is we don't know. If like we are seated here, nobody has been to planet Jupiter. If I tell you there is a couple dancing in Jupiter, it's a weird claim. Your position cannot be there. Your response cannot be there's no couple dancing in Jupiter.
But Jupiter itself is there.
Yeah, but you cannot say that there's no couple. Your position will be you don't know. And then you ask me, what evidence do I have to support that claim? Yes. If I don't bring enough evidence, you go back to your research default setting, which is you don't know whether there is a dancing couple in Jupiter. So that is the position.
Can I ask you a question? Sorry. Do you think I can also say that there isn't?
That you'll also have to prove that.
Precisely.
That's why I said God not existing and God existing are not default positions. The default position is we don't know.
So according to you, there is not enough evidence for the existence of God.
Exactly. The one who has made a claim about the existence of God has not accompanied with sufficient evidence to warrant a belief in that.
Jared, you want to go? Yeah, go ahead. Yeah. Then I'll bring in.
But you also admit, in the same logic, that you have also not adduced sufficient evidence that God does not exist.
Yep.
So
because I don't have the burden to.
You don't have the burden of proof. Yeah. So therefore, even as an atheist, your position is such that you don't know whether God exists or not.
Yeah.
But so if we don't,
we are assuming the God of Christianity here, right?
I'm assuming, actually, that was to be my second question. Okay. When you say God does not exist, as an atheist, are you referring to all the gods in the world, or only the God of the Bible?
So this is my position with regard to that question. I am an atheist of Abrahamic God, the God of Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. That one I can logically prove it does not exist.
It doesn't exist. But
There are
you may
other
not
thousands
know.
gods that I cannot, like if an Indian tell me my God is that cow, I cannot say that God doesn't exist. I cannot question whether he has the attribute that would warrant us calling it a God. So I'm agnostic to all other God, but an atheist to the Brahmanic.
Okay,
God.
that's very good. You are an atheist to Abrahamic. So my question will be, before we even, I feel like we started this conversation in the middle.
Okay.
We should have started by defining terms. This person you say, you call God, in your understanding, and you claim he does not exist. Do you know who he is?
Yeah,
I feel like in this room, Linsa is here. If she walked out and somebody asked me, is Linsa in the room? I'll look around.
I say no.
Say no, she's not in, because I know her, and of course she's not here. Now that person you are saying God does not exist. Do you know him
As defined in the Holy Text, yes.
as defined in
Yeah.
the Bible?
In the Holy Text, yeah. In
So
Quran.
as defined in the Bible and the Quran, according to you, does not exist.
No, you see, fictional characters exist in real life. Like the Game of Thrones, for those who have watched, the Lannisters, they don't exist in real life, but we can even learn moral lessons from Game of Thrones. Doesn't mean that the whole episode is a reality. Or Harry Potter, those who have read, the Lord Voldemort. You can learn moral lessons from them. It doesn't mean they actually exist as depicted in those stories. So the God that I'm talking about is a character that has been presented in a book called the Bible, the Quran, those two basically, and the Torah. So I'm saying that character, as all the attributes given, cannot exist, at least in a logical sense.
Okay.
Okay. Let me bring Linsa. Linsa, here where we are.
I can hear that. So with arguments to God and existence, how can we explain that human mind came from matter?
I think actually he's better position. I've had him argue before, and he's better position to argue for me. That one, in terms of where you can, it's called a reduction to absurdity something. So you see, and that's why I will keep referring to my default position. The default position is we don't know. Let's assume we don't have evidence to that, like how consciousness arises and how our mind thinks. We should not then make a leap. We should say, we don't know how mind works, let's go and find out. Not, we don't know how mind works, therefore God. You get it? So we should not make that leap. But we actually know how the mind works. We know, that's why we have neurosurgeons. I'm not a neurosurgeon, so I'm not speaking from a scientific perspective. But we have an idea of how mind works. We know, that is why we're able to, we can even control people's mood. You can be injected with something and you're happy. Tomorrow you can be injected something, they can scan the brain and do all manner of things. Of course, we don't know it to the bits. But it's a scientific question. There are so many things we don't know. We don't know even like quantum and physics and stuff. They don't even make sense to me sometimes. But I cannot say I don't understand this thing, therefore it must be God. I have to go back to the default position that I don't know this thing, I don't understand them. Once we have the evidence, we will believe in them. For now, we remain in the
So is there still hope? Maybe let me come. There's still hope that more evidences will come.
Probably, yeah, because
some researchers.
But I can tell you one thing: it will not come from the religious community.
Okay.
It will come from. It will come from the
let me throw in something here.
them.
Now, number one, I don't know whether that's what he is saying, but I seem to hear the argument to lean more towards the idea that absence of evidence is really evidence of absence, which is not true. The fact that you don't have evidence for something does not mean that it is not there. Okay? And number two, you will realize that we have limited the idea of evidence here to be scientific evidence. And I think that is the second mistake. There are so many kinds of evidence. There is philosophical evidence, there is theological evidence, there is experiential evidence, there are so many circumstantial evidence in a court of law. There are so many lines of evidence that can be there that we are not limited to scientific evidence. In fact, the idea that scientific evidence is the best way of knowing is a logical fallacy. Let's begin there. It is a folly of thought. And anyone who proposes should tell us how they know. Because if scientific, and let me just explain, if scientific evidence is the only or the best way of knowing, all you need to do is give us scientific evidence for that statement. And there is none, because it is a philosophical statement, not a scientific statement. So if you can't give scientific evidence for your main premise, then you have destroyed your argument. So I think we need to be more, and this is, when having these discussions, I always call for a bit more of kindness and people appreciating where we are coming from, that we shouldn't push that scientific evidence be the only delimiter for us knowing whether there is a God. And I think if we are to pursue evidence, there are a lot of evidences that God has provided to people for us to believe in him. So that instead of saying that there is no evidence, that we have not adduced any evidence, I think we need to be more open and more candid to ourselves and say, do these evidences actually work? And on the contrary, what is the atheist presenting to us?
Okay.